Before I start, let me ask how many of you have actually read what you received in the email? Okay, so that's good. So we'll take that into account as we run through it with you and then more quickly perhaps get to the Q&A. So the board's now approved the signed purchase and sale agreement that the committee's negotiated with the buyer. And as I said, we've received back their signed copy of the PSA. The board's also approved the ballot wording, which is in the presentation, to authorise the club to sign the PSA. And really now we're down to informing you all, giving you the information you need to vote. Fellow committee members, Carl Christensen, Tom Graham and myself will outline the 8-month-long path to get to this point, the details of the proposed transaction, and answer any questions you might have. Before I start, I'd like to just acknowledge the contribution the committee's received from Tom Graham and Jeff Ratto. We were fortunate to co-opt them to work with our committee. Their industry knowledge, contacts, and expertise has proved invaluable to get us to this point. We and the board owe them a real debt of gratitude. Let me be clear though, the details of this particular transaction are completed and are not open for renegotiation. The ballot is an up and down yes/no vote on this proposed transaction. A yes vote means that in 18 to 24 months, the club will have approximately $10 million to reinvest in its future. A future, we hope, will ultimately result in a sustainable golf club. How the funds are invested will be the responsibility of the future board working with membership, not the responsibility of this current board. A no vote means the club is left where it is today, in a pretty unsustainable, uncertain financial situation, with no clear good options, except perhaps to sell the entire property. I'd like Carl to step up and take us through the presentation. Thanks, Carl.
I can't stand being behind a podium. So what we want to do is talk a little bit about, and you've all can you hear me well? Oh, sure, okay. What transpired over the last several months that led to where we are today? Next one, Brian. Just, there. It's working earlier. Hold on. Sorry. It went to sleep on me. So,
yeah, why don't, okay.
Just
okay.
Keep them entertained, Brian. While we're doing this, why don't you talk a little bit about the process, Tom, that we followed with the first one, catch up?
Just to give you a little bit of an idea as to how we got started on this and then the roadmap to get to where we are. At the beginning, obviously, we had to identify which parcel was the ideal parcel to sell. You'll see in the presentation we looked at about 3 or 4, and everyone came up with the same conclusion that we sell the 24 plus acres along 17 and 18 for a lot of reasons. One of the main ones was it's no pipelines are on it, so we don't think there's any contamination there, and access. Those are the 2 key at this point. At that time, we decided to sell that one. Is, well, how do we go about it? Should we just hire a bunch of brokers, use a shotgun approach, put it out there and see what happens? Decided not to go that route. If you want to get a quality developer, and that's someone who comes in, entitles, builds, and sells, stays with you more or less in a partnership, they're not going to respond to the shotgun approach. So what we decided to do was go with what we call an off-market approach. And that is select a list of, as it turned out, 7 key developers in the area. A developer that will come in and, first of all, has financial wherewithal, will then come in and entitle, build, and remain around. We didn't want someone coming in and entitling and then flipping the property, because you're not going to get that much on the front end for that. And we didn't want someone that would come in later on and only does entitled property. So we came up with a list of 7 local major developers. That list was comprised by people in the industry. We put together an extensive RFP and sent it out to those developers. And as a result of that, we got 2 very strong responses. One from the company that is on the purchase agreement, has signed it. It's called Meritage. Meritage is a public national home builder. They're the 7th largest home builder in the country, and their valuation on the stock exchange is several $billions. So we satisfied the financial there. They're also very experienced in all aspects of single home development. We didn't want anything beyond that. We didn't want any multifamily or attached. The other developer was Shea. Shea is one of the, I think, ranked 17th or 18th in the country in home building. Meritage, by the way, is ranked number 7. So we had 2 of the strongest developers in the area. Shea also is very strong in Richmond, has a good strong Richmond presence. And we commenced negotiations with both of them. Jeff Ratto handled much of the Shea. I handled the Meritage. And we went back and forth over a period of several negotiations. And finally, we came out with Meritage for several reasons, one of which they offered us more money. Shea dropped out. And they also offered us a package, as you'll see in the presentation, worth maybe another $1 million, $1.2 million, in terms of redeveloping parts of our club, the main one of which you all know about, the parking lot. They've agreed to take it all the way down to the base, rebuild the base, and rebuild the parking lot from scratch. That's probably $500,000 to $700,000 right there. In addition, you'll see a new entry area. There'll be a new cart path on 17 and 18. That'll be part of their emergency vehicle access. That will consist of about 6 feet of new cart path and then 2 or 3 feet on either side of what we call block grass. So it has to support a fire engine, but it also has grass growing up through it, so you don't really notice that other 2 or 4 feet. During this process, we wanted to see what kind of reaction we would get from the city of Richmond. And Eddie Orton, who is a member of the club and one of the favored developers in Richmond, set up meetings with Carl and I on the one hand, and the mayor, Tom Butt. We spent about an hour with him going through the situation at the club, and he was very much in favor of what's going on. And then we also had about an hour-and-a-half meeting with the director of the planning department, Richard Mitchell, and he was even more favorable. They both spend a lot of time here at the Chamber of Commerce. They both grew up in Richmond, and they understand the value of the club to the city. I think at that point we had put together the number of events that had taken place over the last 15 months. Out of 227 events, 184 had involved the city of Richmond in one way or another, be it the Chamber of Commerce, be it weddings, birthday parties, that kind of thing. So that's sort of the process of how we got to where we are with a signed agreement. And if you guys have this working, I'll let you go.
Well, now we really abbreviate it. Okay. The committee, really, I think, as Thomas said, we looked at where the best value was with the property, where we could get the largest parcel, least interruption to golf course activities for all of us, and best return. And with that, want to go to the next one, Brian? It's generally just an outline of the property. You've all seen it. The 3 parcels we have, about 182 acres. And is this automatically going, Brian? No, that's fine. It has 2 different zonings. It's a Parks and Rec, open area basically, and planned area. And so with this, the city has a lot of say in what we do out here. And so we'll be working closely with them, where actually Meritage will be. We chose the real estate study done probably 10 years ago as kind of a baseline for outlines of parcels around the course. And that's shown here in either white areas, the 2 yellow areas, and 1 black area. And we took an analysis of what was least disruption, obviously best contiguous large parcel we could sell. How do you get access to it, which was key, because we have several parcels that there's really no access to except across the course itself. So if you look at the building, the perimeter, it's either has railroad tracks or it has housing development with no access through it. And as Thomas said, lowest probability of environmental issues. Out of that, we decided on the 24 acres or so on the west side of the property along 17 and 18. And many of you have seen the stakes out there with some plastic ribbon tied on it, which forms the edge or boundary of the course to the development itself. As Tom said, we felt it was important that it be single-family homes. And going further in this, the more important part of all this was both Tom and Jeff's involvement as champions for each developer. So we would have conversations, information would come in, and each one of them was responsible for either Meritage or Shea. And we did have presentations to the Long-Term Planning Committee. We're fortunate enough to have all the board members there. So that was a positive. And out of that, there was future or further development of their proposals. We went back 3 or 4 times, I think, after that in terms of getting best value for the course as well as best additional considerations. And then as a committee, we came back to the board and recommended that we move forward with Meritage on probably three considerations. One was money. We received $4,000 more per lot than we did from Shea. Shea just stopped and didn't want to do have any further conversation. We had better considerations, and actually, in my opinion, we had better interest from Meritage than we had from Shea. They were just deeply engaged the entire time with us. And as has been said, we have a signed agreement from Meritage, so we're ready to move forward with everyone's approval. These are 2 site configurations. We received one from Meritage and the lower one from Shea Homes. They're literally identical. Minor changes here or there in them. And so it just shows how they will use the property. And we had originally identified a boundary up into here. That probably will not be the boundary ultimately. The boundary will be much closer to the parcels of land that are being sold, so we will actually have more space coming down the hill past the parking lot, and this may be future practice area for us as we look forward. A couple of site sections, we picked Meritages, and the upper one is, call it from the 17th green, and what the view may be like there. You'll see some house roofs, and as you go back further towards the tee box on 17, you'll see more of the houses. As you go further from that point down along 18, the houses tend to drop due to grade, and you'll be looking across the top of them. And then the lower shot here section is the view from the dining room, which is across the top of the houses. One of the other considerations that was key for Meritage was they agreed to remove all trees on that parcel. So all the eucalyptus go away. Every tree out there goes away. There will be some trees they'll bring back, but the eucalyptus will go away. Next one, Brian. Okay, so what we were able to receive is 90 lots sold at $154,000 a lot, which comes to $13,860,000. And we will have progressive payments, which are really deposits. And these all occur at specific points in time. So so at signing, we'll have $100,000 moved into the escrow account. At the close of the feasibility analysis, which is normally 90 days from the signing, although in this case, I think there's a real push by Meritage to try and close their feasibility by the end of the year so they can book the project this year. So that's shortening it 2 months out of the process right there. At that point, there's a deposit of $150,000 in escrow. 12 months following that, there's another $150,000 put into escrow. They do have the option to purchase a couple of additional 90-day periods for $100,000 each. And then at closing, the remainder of the funds are made available. So we're really looking at a period of time that's probably 18 months to 2 years out when everything closes from this point and cash is in hand here at the club. The other thing that was valuable here is Jeff Rado's contributions, and along with Tom's, in striking a deal at the very end. So after Meritage is complete with the housing, if the market changes and they get a return greater than 18%, that gets split between the club. It's a long ways out, maybe it's a pipe dream, but at least it's another financial consideration that we did not see with Shea. Okay, the additional considerations that we get improvements on, but we don't have to pay for, that are included in the deal. We're rebuilding the parking lot, which is substantial. Rebuilding the cart path along the 17th and 18th fairway that Tom had mentioned, should that be the location for the emergency vehicle access road. If that happens, then they're going to be forced to rebuild the 18th green, and because we'll have to move it in order to get truck circulation, fire truck circulation around the clubhouse, as well as the removal of all the trees. So it's a real value for us overall. Okay, next one. Okay, back up. Sorry, Brian, let me go back one. Okay, the other one is by going the way we chose, we did not engage a real estate agent. And with that, we probably had a net expense savings to the club about $475,000. It's a big number. That's the value we had in having both Tom and Jeff working with us here and the method we chose. Okay, we talked about a number of these, going down the list. Oh, as part of this, we'll get a new entrance to the site here. At some location down near the main entry, we'll get a new gate and structure out there as it relates to the development and their access to their parcel. We will have separate access. They'll have access to their parcel of housing. We'll still have a gate and access to our course. Meritage will deal with all drainage improvements that occur along the edge of 17 and 18 at their property line. And the other one is we did negotiate that we can take structured payments at the end based on our tax consideration and where we are and what our expenditures will be, which means that we don't have to take all the money at once. We have 3 years to take whatever we believe we want to take, and that really is just based on taxes. Okay, so where are the risks here? Obviously, the buyer can default at any point. We can default. They may want to come back and collect expenses if we default for some reason. If they're not able to get approvals from the city, those get returned. And during their 90-day or 31-day, hopefully, period of time here, they can renege on everything and walk away. And then following due diligence, they can always make the choice to walk away, but they will forfeit any deposits. That's just some of the risk. Okay, do you want to talk about any of this? We just really covered most of this, I think.
One of the things we thought was important, that after the due diligence period, all the deposits, including the one that was previously made upon signing, but all the project deposits going forward, will be immediately released to the club with no restrictions. So when that first $150,000 comes in after the due diligence period, they'll be immediately released to the club, that $150,000, and then the $100,000 that was paid at the signing. and then as the other deposits come in, they'll be released to us. The only danger we have in refunding them is, one, if they can't get their entitlements from the city, and two, let's say they find contamination on the property that was not able to be determined was there during the due diligence period. But otherwise, the deposits are ours as soon as they're made.
Go to the next slide, Brian. Okay, so what happens in the near future? Should this be agreed upon by the club, 2019 is probably a period of time when we all engage on where we should reinvest the money. What are we going to invest in? So it'll involve all the membership in 2019. 2020, we really have to start planning for those decisions made in 2019 as to how we're going to move forward. There will be some costs, planning costs, depending on what we choose to do with the course, if we want to do something with the clubhouse, whatever it may be. We have to start planning so when the funds are released, we are in a position to move forward with construction of whatever the improvements are. And then following all the approvals, Meritage will enter into constructing the homes, which will take about 2 years overall. So it will be construction, a lot of noise and activity along that side of the course for a couple of years. So I inserted the ballot into here. You've all received the ballot by now. I know I've received mine. And it's a yes or no. If we go to the next slide, Brian. This basically is just the words that are in the ballot itself specifically. The membership will authorize the board to enter into an agreement with Meritage. And with that, we'll sell the 24 acres. If not, and it's a no vote, it's voted down, then we'll figure out what we do next. So it's pretty much Q&A right now.
So that's the presentation, and it's in line with what you've received. I'm sure you've got lots of questions. We'll try to handle this as kind of regularly as possible. And so people put...
Why don't we start with Charlie? We have a series of questions we've received already.
Okay, so
why don't we just start with the questions we have, kind of give what we believe to be the response. We did receive one question that asked about the financial condition and capability of Meritage. It's pretty evident that they're financially capable, a large company doing buildings all over the country. What's the history or size in completing projects? Meritage has completed projects in 9 states and probably 16 communities in California. So they're able to complete and execute the work. What were the factors that influenced the committee and the board of directors to select Meritage over Shea? I think we've answered that already. It's pretty evident. Are there any actual or potential conflicts of interest with any member of the LTPC or the board of directors in Meritage proposal in general? And the answer is no, there are no conflicts of interest between any of us internally. So let's see, will any member of the board or LTPC receive any compensation from Meritage or RCC related to the sale or development of the property? No. Might be nice, but no. Approximately what costs have been incurred or anticipated by RCC in completion of the sale? So far, we spent some money on legal costs. I think we spent some money on a survey. So our sunk costs are less than $20,000 to date. Obviously, as we move forward with closing, there are closing costs. There'll probably be some type of tax from the city of Richmond as a transfer tax, which we don't really know what that is yet. And ultimately, there'll be some income tax that has to be paid. It appears that it may be as long as 2 years before we receive money and that we can safely use on our operating deficit. Does the board of directors have a 2-year or more budget plan that will maintain solvency of the club for 2 years? That's part of the loan we took out to help cover these costs help us bridge the 2 years before we were able to sell the land and figure out our next steps. And then we had another one for from Fergus. My biggest issue is what happens in 2 or 3 years when all the zoning issues are resolved and the buyer comes back and says, we're not ready to do this deal, but we think the property is only worth $5 million. By then, we'll surely be flat broke with very little hope of funding another buyer, starting the process all over. Again, we have a specific price. Obviously, they can always back out, and that's part of the risk in the deal. We just hope we keep it moving all the way through. They would forfeit their deposit monies, obviously. So those are the questions we have to date.
Okay. Gentleman in the blue.
Yeah, I see two potential problems.
Excuse me.
I see two potential problems. One is with the city, which I guess you've already been talking to the city about their feelings, and it apparently is positive. The other problem has to do with the possible contamination. Has anybody drilled any holes down there already to see about contamination?
When we first chose that parcel, and obviously we're looking at others, that's one of the first things that came to mind. So you can do due diligence on contamination one of two ways. You can do it yourself, or you can have the buyer do it. We were actually going to do what's called a phase one, where you bring a consultant out, they look at all the maps, they look at all the history, and we actually had a contract for that, and we were going to go that route if there were pipelines on this property, if there were easements for it or any evidence. When we got the title report back, it showed there were no easements on this particular property. It's one of the reasons we liked it. And so at that point in time, we made the decision to have the buyer do the due diligence. So in answer to your question, no, there have not been any phase one done, which is just a study. No holes poked, which is a phase two, but Meritage, the buyer, will be doing both of those, as I understand it. Certainly a phase one. If anything comes up that looks like it might need additional scrutiny, then they'll do a phase two, which is go in and actually poke holes. We don't have any evidence, or at this point, I don't have any concern that there's contamination there, but you don't know.
Just to add, the pipelines are up around 3 and 4 and down to the driving range. That's where the easements for the pipelines are. So we figure we were pretty safe where we were. Next question, gentleman behind.
Thanks. I'm Fergus Hanahan of the famous memo there. Let me ask you a couple of questions, if I may. I could do one at a time, but I have maybe 4 or 5. So just stop me and I'll wait my turn again.
Try for 2 and then we may come
Perfect. Okay, that's better than I'm usually treated, so that's good. The first one, in your report, which is really good, the 18 pages I really enjoyed reading, and I really want to thank everybody involved. I can't even imagine how much work you guys took on, but I do have some questions. First is in your report, is feasibility the same as due diligence? Is that the same concept? Yes. Okay. Second, that was an easy one. Can I have 2 more?
Sure, why not?
That wasn't a question, by the way. I don't get 2 years, I get 3 years. And I get 95 days in due diligence, which is 3 months. I get 9 months to secure approval, so that's 12 months. And then I get 18 months 18 months until closing. So the question is, what is that 18-month period? After they get approval and all the due diligence is done, what's that 18-month period?
I don't think that's the way it lays out. It lays out they have up to 90 days to do their due diligence,
That's 3
feasibility.
months, right.
And then they have 18 months from that point to get their entitlements. That takes it out to 21 months.
Oh, it said 9 months in your report to secure approval.
Then that's not correct.
Okay,
They
that's
have
what
the
it
right
says.
to extend 2 option periods when they, and pay additional deposit to go out 90 days and then maybe another 90 if in fact the entitlement period is taking longer.
Okay,
And the key is it goes to the city as to how long this is going to take. And that's going to be dependent on, one, how much CEQA, which is environmental study, they're going to have to do. So if they have to do a full EIR, it's going to take longer. But in talking to the city and Richard Mitchell, they were talking about the possibility of doing what's called a mitigated neg deck, which is to just do studies in specific areas like traffic, noise, that kind of thing, instead of the full, 9 yards, full 10 yards. So we're hoping they can use what's called a neg deck. That will get us probably within that period of 21 months, maybe 18 months.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure where that extra 9 came from.
It's in here. If I read it wrong, it's very possible.
Okay,
But
that's not the way the agreement lays out.
I
though.
got you. I don't know where the 9 months, but it is identified in there.
Okay, we'll move on and come back to you.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you.
Next question. Let's go round the room. Gentleman at the back there.
My name's John. I'd also like to thank you guys for all the effort that you put into this. And my questions are really practical. And it has to do with the fact that I'm like a 15 index golfer. So could you go back to the site layout for me? There. Now, where's the tee on the 18th green?
So this is 17 running up here, and this is 18 running up here.
And so on the top, and we're talking about Meritage on the top, right?
Yeah, they're very identical.
And so that right across from the 18th bunker, where would the houses be? The bunker that's on the bay side there.
This one?
Yeah. So my concern is that I typically hit a high slice to the right about
This one
200
here?
yards.
No, but I'm working my way down the fairway. There's a bunker here.
Right. I guarantee you my high 200-yard slice to the right would have broken a window this morning.
You have insurance.
And taking a lesson's not going to help because I'm doing that. So my question to you guys is, I understand the contract is what it is and that's not going to change. Could they consider changing the layout? And as an example to that, we've got that view line coming off the 18th tee right there. Why don't you move the green space and the open space further down and put the houses there beside the tee, and at least that way the ball's going to land in some open space instead of through a window.
Just to give you some idea of the thought process there, first of all, that there is a 200-foot open space segment on the across from the 17th green and then the 18th tee box, and that's, we figured, because that'll give us a break, and that's where people are pretty much standing around anyway, waiting for someone to tee off or waiting for someone to putt. So we thought it important to have some view area and some open space. As far as hitting balls out there, that's one of the first things that came to mind and the first things I discussed with actually both Shea and Meritage. They both have built golf course communities. They both know that people slice. And they both know that, there is the distinct possibility that balls are going to go flying off because they're not going to put up nets. The boundary between our property and theirs will be initially speaking anyway, from design purposes, will be a 2 or 3 foot berm with a uniform fence on top, maybe 3 or 4 feet. Our ball's going to fly over, probably. They know that. It's their responsibility and their risk to deal with it, not the guy hitting the ball.
And that was the follow-on, Tom. What happens if, say, you take out a window or you hit somebody? Is that on the golfer? Do we have to pay the homeowner and repair the window? I mean, what actually happens?
I'm not an expert in golf law and breaking window law. I know in most courses I've played on, in a particular course like Telluride, where they've done the same thing, if you break a window, you leave a note. And usually their insurance pays for it. But I'm not an expert in the law.
Could we come to the board for reimbursement? All right, my follow-on question then has to do with the entrance. And when I was looking at the entrance, it looked to me like we're selling them the property that we own. Is that right? Or will we still own the land that our entrance is on? And do you know whether this will be a public or private road?
So let me say, we define the envelope, the 24 plus or minus acres. What you are seeing here is conceptual. It will depend to a large extent on what the city accepts and what the city wants to do. We've got some additional boards that Meritage supplied to us last week. And again, it's their concept. Our PSA says they need to agree with us, or we need to agree with them, what they do essentially within the parcel, what they do with regard to where they move the gate, what they do with regard to their entranceway, what they do with regard to the construction exit. So these are all conceptual within the envelope that we've defined. It really looks like, as Carl said, that this area, which we're actually quite sensitive to, is we should be able to shift the envelope down a bit here. And that's going to be to our, to our benefit. But basically, we define the envelope.
Thank you. And I had one last one before I sit down.
Let me add just one thing to this.
We're going to move on. We'll come back to you.
But the last one here is Meritage will have engaged a golf course architect to work that edge with them. So we will be having considerations.
I'm going to move on. Drew?
Will that fencing also extend over across the open space?
So I didn't hear.
Yes. You mean here, Drew?
Yes.
Yes.
Will it be sufficient to keep dogs off our property?
We'll have to talk about whether it is or not, yes. We talked about having a more open edge to the site with them in terms of more engagement, so we don't have housing that is like, call it up along this eastern edge of the course. So we did talk to them significantly about some engagement, which means, patios, things that open out, and less of a fence. So we'll need to talk about how to keep dogs out, yes.
One of the things we wrote into the agreement is on the interface between their property and our property, we will have input into their CC&Rs and HOA rules so that we can review that ahead of time. For instance, one of the things we were adamant about is no parking in the back, no working on vehicles in the back, that kind of thing. And anything else that comes up in the process, we've reserved the right to have input in those areas. And also the design. We did a lot of that initially, is we made them come back 3 times with initial concepts on the design as it interfaces with the golf course, so we don't end up with what we have up on 4 in that area with the ugly backs looking at us.
Fergus, yeah. Hey, just wait. Microphone's coming.
I play courses down in Arizona, and there's one called Starfire, and they have homes all over it. People who find out that golf balls are traveling into their area have put up fences and stopped that. So, that's what they could do if they wanted to. If
Well,
they still want to get golf balls and play with them, that's up to them.
Well, this will be part of the CC&Rs and our input as to what can be done or not done. And so that's part of what our consideration was initially, is making sure we had control over that boundary edge.
Well, my friend hit a golf ball into a swimming pool, and the guy was taking care of it at the time. My friend went over to him and apologized, and he says, "That's all right. Would you like some golf balls?" And he said, "Oh, sure." He gave him a bag full. There must have been probably 25 or 30 of them in there. So it does happen.
Okay. Far back?
Yeah, if we're gonna take the 18th green out.
Okay.
If we're gonna take the 18th green out, have we given thought to where we're gonna place it, the new one?
No, and basically, the issue with the 18th green right now is If there's an emergency vehicle access road back through here, it may impact where the green is, and so it might have to be moved. If they choose to find another location, then nothing would probably happen with the green.
And I stress that this is conceptual. Again, the people, you know, the biggest consideration for the evacuation route, the EVA, that's going to be the city. The city's going to decide what's required. So with the best will in the world, you know, Meritage have said, and we have sort of said, this makes sense, but at the end of the day, it's going to depend on the city.
So this is the board that Meritage gave us, one of the boards. It's a little easier to read perhaps than the slide. This is the path of our current cart path. And that's what's going to be converted into, potentially be converted into emergency vehicle access. Obviously, it has to both be wide enough, it has to be strong enough, and it has to be straight enough to accommodate fire trucks. So we know that they're going to come up through the parking lot, and they're going to get to the point right out here where our cars come down from the 18 green. And the question is, will we have to straighten that to allow the fire trucks to get around? That's a question that we can't answer today. That's what that money is in for. They've said if we have to put the EVA out, you know, through the back up to the 18th green or something like that, they'll pay for the reconstruction of the green. We don't know where it's going to be. I just wanted to point out that this is the best effort they can make today.
Gentleman in the back, yeah.
Yes, what kind of monkey wrenches can the city, you know, throw into this? What type of monkey wrenches can the city throw into this deal, you know, once we sign it? And if you can you rank whether you think that's a low risk or a high risk? Because it sounds to me like Tom Butt's in favor and the city planner's in favor, but the city council, you know, can you comment on that?
The city is going to have a huge impact on what can be done here, obviously. One is the land has to be rezoned, which means you need a general plan amendment. That gives the city just about any kind of discretion they want. Unfortunately, we're not going in there with already pre-zoned property. Two, as I understand it, in the election recently, a couple changes were made in the city council that might afford more favorability, but I'm not expert. You maybe it, you know, in a minute, if you could tell us what you think. But the city has full control, and the city could approve fewer than 90 lots. That's what both Shea and Meritage came up with as ideal for both us and them. There is a provision in the agreement that says for every lot fewer than 90, $154,000 gets subtracted. It's a straight arithmetic calculation. So we're hoping for 90. It could be less. That would lower the purchase price. But in answer to your question, there are all sorts of monkey wrenches, so to speak, that can come from a local agency, in this case the city, and there may be other agencies with jurisdiction. That's part of development. That's why you and all your neighbors aren't doing it. Rosemary, could you help us a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of comments. One is the recent election was very favorable for this project. It very easily could have gone in a way that I would be very pessimistic about this. And I think the mayor and the planning director are absolutely right that a majority of the city council, I think, will look favorably upon this. To change the general plan is a big deal. And it can only be done twice a year. There are certain dates when it can be done. So that slows it up a little bit. The other aspect is that we have established a relationship with Parchester Village, the neighborhood right over here. And I know that the last couple of years we've taken Christmas presents down for their Christmas party for the kids, and we've established, established a relationship. We need to keep that relationship going, and we need to brief this to them so that they aren't surprised and can be on our side. We do have a group in the city, and they are represented on the city council. Luckily, they no longer will have a majority come January, that probably would not look favorably upon this. They have announced they only want low and very low income housing, and some moderate, but no upscale housing. So they would probably be pushing for multiple units, if anything. And so luckily, as I say, come January, they will not have a majority on the city council. However, they have a presence, and they have an organization, and if they choose to oppose a country club's wishes, which goes against their principles, they could make it hard on us. And their first, I'm guessing, their first activity would probably be to go to Parchester and try to get them against us. And so I think it's really important that we keep Parchester friendly as this process goes forward.
I would say that at the very beginning, when Tom and Carl went to see the city, we made it very clear that this was the survival of the club, that if they wanted this space to continue, we needed to get this transaction done. And I do believe, Tom, that they're very sympathetic to that perspective. Next question. Sir.
Thank you. Do me a favor, could you take a look at page 14 of your, and here's where I got kind of alarmed a little bit. Because we're not getting any kind of a purchase option payment. I think the club is bound, but Meritage is not for some period of time. And then it says under risks, which is page 14, it says if approval's not awarded, and this is the pertinent one, or if Meritage determines the project is not feasible, Meritage may give notice and all deposits are refunded. And my understanding, if reading that simple sentence, if my timing is right, they could come back a month before the closing, after all due diligence is done, after all approvals are met, they could come back and say, look, the value of the property is not 13 million anymore, it's much lower, and we would rather back out and give us our money back. And that's really the source of my reading of that little.
That's not the case. That was corrected. It was part of the errata. If you read that last sentence, I think it was corrected, and it says if they determine after the due diligence period that the project is no longer feasible, they can walk away, but they'll forfeit their deposits.
That's not what it says.
That's what the agreement says.
All right, but again, the deposits in total are very little, $400,000 or $500,000. This is a $13 million deal, and if they say, gee, this property that we've looked at, we're not going to get 90 houses, we're going to get 50 houses or 40, and we just don't think the deal is worth it anymore because the property has gone down in value, which, as you know, happens in reality, then they can come back and forfeit a couple of $100,000 and walk away, and we have no money and really no future, because if we start this process over again, it could take literally years.
That's a risk, but there's no way to take away that risk. And a purchase agreement is really...
Premium takes away the risk.
The purchase agreement is assigning risk to the buyer and the seller. In a deal like this, you always have the risk that the buyer will just say, heck, this isn't worth it, and walk away, we'll forfeit our deposit.
Real estate expert, but that's just not true. Most real
I'm
estate.
sorry, but,
Most real estate involves a purchase premium. Someone pays a premium to take a look at a piece of property for X period of time. And then if they don't want that property at any time, they forfeit that premium. That's, at least I am an expert in financial matters, not so much real estate. And
If you'd like to talk about it afterwards, I'd be happy to.
Well, I'd
but,
like to hear the explanation.
That's the way these deals are normally put together. And this is actually a good deal for the club. We push the deposits way up, and this is a fairly normal process that's been set up in here, and it's a pretty standard deal, the way it's been structured. There's always that possibility that someone will walk away. If the economy goes in the tank, you're going to see deals cratering all over the place. It's the same with a house. If someone thinks after they go through the due diligence that they get their 3% back on the purchase price of the house. That's
Right.
not very much money.
Have you talked about, if that happens, what's next for us?
That's the board decision.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
If I heard correctly at the outset, there's no opportunity for renegotiation of this agreement, is there?
No.
Okay,
I mean,
so all of these questions and concerns that we have are basically academic, right?
It is an up or down decision
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
for this transaction. And you can be critical of that, but we felt it was important to bring a signed PSA back to the membership.
No, I understand, and I think that's fair.
Yeah,
Thank-
you are correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just, there's a gentleman behind you that.
Hi, I'm Todd Wright. I just have two comments. First, I want to compliment the group. This has been a long and arduous trip to bring a proposed agreement, and I happen to have faith in the people who have done it because I've worked with them a bit. I wanted to clarify 2 points. One is, on a real estate transaction, I am currently involved representing a seller in a sale transaction for new development in a South Bay city of the same size transaction, and our deposit is slightly smaller than this, and the developer has, the money has gone hard. He can forfeit it if he chooses not to go forward to close. It's a standard transaction in real estate of this size. The second issue, to address the slice question. I am somewhat guilty here, but what I can say, because I assisted in doing some initial layouts before the surveyors came in, and I looked at about 9 different courses to get a real clear indication of how far out homes were specifically for a slice, and laid that out, and then went out with members before those stakes were set in the field, and to see that, and it was done with the interest of looking at how far out a slice had to be. Now the difficulty is it's a perception issue right now, because you can't really tell until you get there and the homes are built. But I want to let you know that concern and that dimension was looked at in detail.
Tom, where's the boundary in relationship to the access road that's there along 18?
If you'd seen the stakes that have been out there for a series of months, those are the same ones that form the boundary that you see on the drawings. So that should give you a sense.
Are they on the outside of the road?
They're inside the road. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Todd. Next.
Hey, Ferguson, I think there are 2 points that we need to respond to you, that is including the PSA. Number one, if this situation that you describe occurs, the club gets all the survey material, environmental materials, special studies, engineering studies, all that stuff comes over to us. And in respect to time, which is of the essence, if the developer walked away, by that time, the general plan amendment, the rezoning and everything else would have gone through. So you've short-circuited the next process if you get into that adverse situation. So there is some benefit to us in receiving those materials, that we could go to somebody else and start the process pretty early, and then the zoning questions and environmental questions have already been answered. So you could like short-circuit that process.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Okay. Eddie?
Yeah, I just want to understand this non-fundability issue. But signing is $100,000, that's refundable. At close the feasibility analysis,
It's $250, but that is fully refundable through the feasibility analysis period of 1 year, right? Or, I mean, yeah, total of 1 year. Is that correct? So,
I need the microphone. If he's to answer, otherwise you can't hear.
the statement, this is a question. So at signing, they put up $100,000, which would be now, basically. And that's fully refundable. And then at the close of the feasibility analysis, they put up another $150,000. My first question on this is all of that still fully refundable for the next 270 days?
No. At that point in time, one, that $250,000 will be released to us, and it'll only go back to them if there's a default by seller or one of the conditions fails, one of which is to get their approvals or they find contamination.
So it is fully, it's pretty much refundable. So in other words, if there's no map change or they find toxics or whatever, they can come back and they get all the money back, and the board knows not to spend that money, right? You guys know that you can't spend that money, right?
That's something
Yeah.
will be, that's something that comes up later on. But yes, that
yeah.
money is potentially at risk.
Okay, now
But it
at the
shouldn't
end
be
of those
that
12
much.
months, let's say that they still go forward, if they purchase the two extensions, is it still, the background here is we Richmondites think this may take a little longer than the time in this thing. And so I'm just trying to figure out, if they do go for the 90-day extensions, which give them, another 6 months, are the deposits then fully vested, or is it still they can go into that additional 6 months, and then if they don't get their approvals or if there is toxics, then they get all their money back?
That same condition still applies.
Still applies. So it's basically still all refundable, like the gentleman said, until closing.
Until closing, yeah, based on those failure of that one primary condition, which is they're not going to get no approvals. They're going to get some approvals.
So if they get some approvals, what happens?
It depends at that point in time. One, do they come back and say, look, we only got 75 lots approved, so that's 15 lots times 154,000. That's how much the purchase price goes down. We want to go ahead.
Okay.
Or they can say we're walking away. Either way, there's a failure of a condition.
And then finally, I do a lot of real estate. This is a totally traditional deal, right down the center of the pipe. And also know how much work is involved in something like this. And Tom and the rest of you guys, this club just can't thank you enough for what you've put into this.
And I will add to that. Eddie is my good friend and golf partner, and I made him say that, so.
Okay. One question just behind you.
This is a real quick question. Did Meritage have any discussion on marketing memberships to these potential home buyers? I mean, are they looking at it like, we're going to sell these houses, it's on a golf course, we would love to have these new buyers be members?
We did talk about that, and in fact, embedded in the agreement is a licensing agreement where we are licensing our name to them for very limited purposes, one of which is marketing. We are allowing them to use our name, and part of that marketing, we've suggested that we would like to have a cooperation arrangement where they could sell memberships. That's a win-win for both sides. So yes, we did discuss it.
Just a quick comment to Eddie's question.
Eddie, we can't spend that $250,000. The money may be released to us, but the RCC Finance, the LLC that raised the money, it's secured by a first deed of trust, so we would get sued by those members, so, no.
Drew, do you have another question?
Yes. What are we going to do with the money?
Coming.
What are we going to do with the money if we do with the sale?
So this board, in its wisdom, focused on getting the transaction done. And so it is the new board coming in, that needs to plan what we need to do with the money. Let's get the transaction done, let's get the vote. It is, we've said to you that number one is to repay the loan, number two, it's for reinvestment in the club. I think that's the extent to which this board is prepared to go, subject the new board working with membership to decide a more detailed plan and put it to the membership. Can't do everything, Drew.
Yes. Again, I'm very impressed with the background work you've done with the city and with Parkchester Village on that. The question I have is there another party, the railroad, that has an interest? And if so, do you potentially see any objections or involvement with them? And do you have any plans to smooth things through the railroad?
Is the railroad going to have an influence on what we're doing? They could come up and say, we don't want houses near you. I mean, we've done developments before where we're much closer to the main line of the railroad. The railroad doesn't have jurisdiction. They can't come along. They could file an objection, but I don't think they are. You can't get a grade crossing if that's what you're talking about. Don't ever try and get one of those. We're not young enough for that. Todd can attest to that one. But no, as long as we're not asking for access across the rail, I don't think they're going to have much of an influence.
Okay. So thank you all for coming. This is a very important decision for you to make. And I'm pleased to see as many of you here as possible. We have one future informational session, and then the votes need to come in and be counted. Thank you all. Thank you for coming.